This is Community Forum. I'm Kurt Radel, Waycross Community Media. Today, we're on location at the Tri-State Warbird Museum located in Batavia. And our special guest is the president of the museum, David O'Malley. David, thank you for having us.
Happy to be here and happy to have you guys.
Before we get into the history and everything else, This is, first of all, very impressive here.
Thank you very much.
What's behind us? Tell us about this plane that's directly behind us.
This is a North American P-51 Mustang. It's a D model, and a lot of people would say it's the airplane that won World War II.
Is that right?
Absolutely. I'd be one of those people.
Was it in both the Pacific and European theaters?
This airplane's specific mission profile worked for the European theater.
Now, let's talk about the history of the museum.
Sure. So we've been here since 2004. We opened to the public in 2005. The museum was a pet project of my father's. He kind of saw a need in a hole in the American education system where the stories of World War II veterans were kind of getting lost in the pages of history books, and had some friends who were World War II veterans and had them speak at my school, and watched a bunch of kids' eyes light up when they heard real human stories being told about World War II that were, something that they could really wrap their heads around a little bit more than facts and figures that they were being tested on in history books. And the human stories were things that they could connect to in ways that they hadn't been exposed to before. And so this idea for this museum came to be at that point and kind of started the snowball rolling down the hill to where we are today.
Well, most people, young people particularly, it's Hollywood. That's the version they have of World War II, not what reality is.
Yeah, absolutely. And, hearing the stories from real veterans' mouths and the harrowing things that they did in the name of protecting our country in that time is something that everybody can learn from, especially kids today who've never been exposed to that kind of stuff.
What is your mission here?
It's threefold. It centers on three words: preserve, honor, and educate. Preservation focuses on the aircraft themselves. We see them as artifacts of history, and things that we can learn from just as we can from the stories of the people. So bringing the airplanes back to life so we can see and hear what they actually were like in the air is tenet one. Honor the veterans and their contributions of the entire greatest generation of the people that we're speaking English here today as a result of their contributions, and it's 80 years almost since the end of World War II, but it's something we still need to remember and learn from today. And then finally is educate. And as I said, the goal was to educate kids on the things that we can learn from the contributions of those veterans and the entire experience that the world had in World War II and all the lessons of history that we can still apply to our lives today.
It seems recently Hollywood is focusing more and more on what happened in the air. Now, where did you get these planes that you have in this hangar?
A couple of different ways to get them. You can buy them like you see them. So some of the airplanes that are in the museum today are pretty much in the condition, maybe marginally improved from the way we bought them. And then some of them we built nearly from the ground up. So the airplane that's sitting behind us, the P-51, was the museum's first completed restoration project. It was a collection of 4 airframes worth of parts that eventually had enough good stuff left over from that collection to make a complete airplane. And we've got 4 more restoration projects, 3 of which have been completed since the Mustang. So, if you can't buy it, build it yourself.
Hey, you told me a story before we started that you actually flew a plane over the ocean to be in part of Hollywood.
Yeah. So our B-25 Mitchell, it's a medium bomber, twin-engine bomber. Hulu engaged us to fly the airplane to Italy to film a 6-part miniseries remake of the film and book Catch-22. So we flew the airplane across the North Atlantic, same route they would have used to ferry aircraft to the European theater in World War II. Spent 6 weeks there filming for the show and flew it back.
You mentioned 2 planes. Give us a breakdown of some of the other aircraft you have here.
So we have everything from liaison airplanes, so civilian aircraft that were repurposed for military duty. So we have 2 different Piper Cubs. We have a bunch of trainers, a PT-17 Stearman, an AT-6 Texan. We have one of our staff members has a PT-22 Ryan, which was a primary trainer. So then we've got fighters and bombers. We've got a P-40 Kitty Hawk single-seat fighter, a Focke-Wulf FW-190, a German fighter, kind of the German complement to the Mustang. We've got a Corsair restoration project that's maybe 65% of the way done, TBM torpedo bomber, all kinds of stuff.
And they fly, most of them, or all of them?
Everything is flying or on its way to. So right now, every airplane in the museum flies except the Corsair, which is in many, many pieces.
You talked about the fact that Hollywood came knocking on your door again. In order for you to comply, you were going to have to tear the entire plane down. Share that story with us a bit.
Yeah, so the Masters of the Air series that just launched earlier this year was about the air war in Europe. And they needed some enemy fighters. We've got one of very few Focke-Wulf FW-190. Ours is technically a replica, but one of the only flying examples around. And they called us, and I kind of explained that involving our airplane and their filming in Europe was going to be a lot, taking it apart and putting it back together and putting it on planes and shipping it across the world, and the conversation quickly ended.
I can imagine that.
Yeah.
You also have some exhibits. One of them, the Doolittle raid. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so the airplanes aren't the only exhibits in the museum. So certainly they're the ones that get the most focus, but we have exhibits all over the museum that are designed to, in many cases, highlight contributions of local Cincinnati veterans. Tom Griffin was a Doolittle Raider. He was from Cincinnati, and the exhibit kind of focuses on his contributions, but to the entire Doolittle raid as well. It was the first American attack on mainland Japan in 1942. It was kind of our first response, offensive response to Pearl Harbor. They took a bunch of B-25s and put them on an aircraft carrier, which if you're sitting next to a B-25, thinking about 16 or 17 of those airplanes sitting on a boat is pretty wild to even conceive of. But Jimmy Doolittle came up with this idea. He asked for volunteers to complete this mission, and it worked. We actually made an attack on Japan. It was a huge morale boost, more than anything, for the American people of, we got attacked at Pearl Harbor. It was unexpected. It was, we did not expect American ground to be involved in World War II. And so to see that, offensive response was a big thing for the American people at the time.
And if I remember the story correctly, the aircraft carrier had hoped to get closer to Japan.
Yes.
But they were spotted.
Yeah.
So they had to go sooner, meaning they couldn't get back. Share that story with us.
Yeah, so they launched a decent amount earlier than intended, and it was, the mission from the get-go was volunteer-based. And again, once it was realized that they were spotted or potentially spotted, they didn't really know at the time. It was, calculations looked like the original intent of the mission was to land in China. China was an ally. Land in China, and then the launch point got backed up, and so basically no airplane landed as intended. But it was one of those things where everybody was a volunteer. Doolittle explained, yeah, this is probably not going to go the way we'd planned. You're probably not going to get to an airport. You're probably going to ditch in the ocean or crash on the coast of China. This is a volunteer thing. You do not have to go, and not one single human being stepped back and didn't go.
A true story, amazing story. Now, as part of your museum on your website, you were talking earlier about some of the veterans commenting on what they endured during the World War II. Share those because you have several videos.
Yeah, so like I said before, one of the museum's missions is to honor the contributions of veterans and highlight veterans, specific veterans, local people, for their contributions so that they're not forgotten. And so we've got a section of the website dedicated to stories and biographies about those veterans. And 20 years ago when the museum was founded, it was a lot closer to World War II, and so those men and women were a lot younger. And so on any given Saturday over there in the museum, you'd see 7 or 8 veterans sitting on the bench telling stories. It was one of those things where family members would be shocked because they'd never heard their father or their grandfather talk about what they'd seen and done in combat, and this place brings it out of them. I don't know if it's because they feel, respected, or it's like a safe space or something, but it gave them a place to share their stories and let them live on.
And I can tell you, I viewed every one of them. Very touching, Very touching indeed. In your mission, you talked about education. Talk about the kids coming here.
Yeah, so, you know, I'm 40 years old now. When the museum was founded, I was barely not a teenager, and I didn't fully get it at that point, but now I've got kids of my own, and I've got a pretty strong respect for education in general, but I've also got a lens into what modern education is like, and there's a lot of tugs and pulls and, variables that go into it, but, at the core, World War II isn't a focal point of modern history teaching anymore. It's kind of, glanced over, and so we think it's way more important, and more value is there than what's being given to it. And so we're kind of like a offshoot school where we're teaching that part of history still.
And you just don't leave it with the kids. You have a series for the adults.
Yeah, absolutely. Life's about learning, and lifelong learning is important. Learning for adults is just as important as it is for kids. If you learn something every day and broaden your perspective, you're going to be a better person as a result. And there's plenty of things that we have to teach adults that, little stories about history that they hadn't learned before, and, broadening your horizon and becoming a better person is something we'd love to help anybody with.
Going back to the kids, what is their reaction?
Every kid's different, both of my kids have different things they like about the museum, and so it's really neat to see the things that resonate with different kids. And the good thing is there's so much that we have to teach from these aircraft, the stories of veterans, that we can find an interest point in any child, and broaden their view of something that's interesting to them, or something that they didn't know about before they got here. And it's really interesting and neat to watch it engage kids in ways that they weren't expecting.
We keep talking about what's available on your website. You also have different events. Among them, what are your plans when it comes to Veterans Day?
We have a Veterans Day event every year called Celebrating Veterans Day, and it's at its core, it's our way of just saying thank you. We kind of like to say that every day is a little bit Veterans Day here at the museum, but that's the day where we can really buckle down and do things that are veteran focused and veteran specific. So every year we fly airplanes, we do a drawing and give rides to veterans, and let them experience the airplanes in the sky in ways that not everybody gets a chance to do.
For those who are interested in the museum, and there should be a lot of people interested, I'm very interested. You have a website. What other social media platforms do you have, David?
Instagram and Facebook are the big ones. The other ones, we didn't see a whole lot of response from the content that we were putting up there. So our focus is on Facebook and Instagram.
Now you're here in Batavia. Mm-hmm. How far have visitors come, generally speaking, to come to this museum?
The longest travel distance that comes to mind, and it's probably the biggest number, period, is New Zealand. So our P-40 we restored as an actual Royal New Zealand Air Force surviving airframe. And so we had a lot of Kiwi fans that were waiting to see that thing get finished. And so once the airplane was done, we've had a bunch of people from New Zealand come to see her.
David, during our conversation, you were talking about the New Zealand fighter.
Yeah.
It's right here.
This is it.
You tell us about this plane.
So this is a Curtiss P-40M Kitty Hawk. So this is an airplane that we restored in-house. We finished it in 2016, took it to the Oshkosh AirVenture Air Show in Wisconsin. It won Grand Champion, which is their version of Best in Show. The goal for this airplane for the restoration was as authentic as possible, indiscernible from how it would have rolled off the factory floor in Buffalo, New York in 1943. And humbly, I think that our team did a great job of accomplishing that goal.
Now, only the New Zealand Air Force use this?
So this airplane was part of the Lend-Lease program. So before Pearl Harbor, during U.S. neutrality while the war was going on, one of the ways that we were tacitly contributing to the war effort was through the Lend-Lease Act, giving materiel to our allies. So one of the ways that happened was with aircraft. The P-40 was one of those aircraft. So this airplane was built by Curtiss in New York. It was painted in its standard colors, taken apart, put in a box, put it on a boat, and shipped to New Zealand, where it served with the Royal New Zealand Air Force.
Let's talk about the hours of operation when you're open.
Sure. Wednesdays from 4 to 7, and Saturdays from 10 to 3 are our public hours. but we're open by appointment for group tours and all kinds of stuff like that. There's restoration staff and our education team and myself are here all week, so it depends on what you need, but we can usually make something work.
This is truly an amazing facility. We thank you so much for having us and being a host.
Oh, my pleasure.
This has been a special edition on location at the Tri-State Warbird Museum in Batavia. I want to thank our director, Tony, who helped make this production possible. I'm Kurt Radel, Waycross Community Media. We'll see you next time.